3 billion in the final analysis that will come through with the tariffs that are going to have to be announced in March. So we are really, I'm really asking again for assistance in this regard, Mr. Kassim. The last question from me is one that says, it's about the role of OCGTs in your application. I guess the question I'm wanting perhaps if you can assist us. You've from 1% to 7%. The question is for me. With the changing demand pattern, can the use of open cycle gas turbines be avoided? Is this the increased use of OCGTs? Is it a function of Eskom's inefficiency, lower EAF only? Or is it a function of the changing demand pattern as well as a function of the type of generators that we may have in the system? Those are the questions to you, Mr. Kassim. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair and panel members. Let me respond. Chairperson, if I can start with your questions. Thanks. I think the first question is these changes in assumptions from a legality perspective allowed? Chairperson, my understanding of the methodology does allow for changes in assumptions that Eskom can submit. We've done this through two previous MYPD and revenue applications, and this has taken that into account. But I think more importantly, over and above that, this is the reality, and we just want to put forward the latest assumptions, the latest costs for the regulator to take into account. So to sum up, legally, it's in the methodology. It has been done before. We don't see any challenges or concerns with regard to updating of assumptions. Chairperson, on your second question in terms of that baseline revenue, I think what I will do in a subsequent public hearing, I'll unpack that in more detail, where I can show the numbers and why, and answer your question around this baseline revenue and the starting point. If you allow, I will do that in a subsequent public hearing to address that particular question of yours, Chair. With regard to the equity, 59 billion, etc. Chair, again, I'll also respond, but let me just reiterate, we still understand that as a legal process, but I will then also include a slide and then present to yourself in a subsequent meeting around that whole issue of the remaining equity injections and our view as Eskom on how NERSA can incorporate it while we still have an outstanding Supreme Court of Appeal currently on the cards. Your last question around the OCGTs and the load factor, Chair, there are two components to it. One is obviously Eskom's EAF, and in the interest of ensuring that we minimize the impact of supply interruptions, it would be more efficient and prudent for Eskom to run its OCGT plants in the interest of the economy, and we would do that. I believe even contribute to that OCGT load factor. One is the natural demand and the peaky shape of it, and two is obviously to fill the gap and to minimize the impact of supply interruption to the country. If I then move on to Mr. Mkize's question around the sales forecast and unchanged, and I think Mr. Sabanda has also spoken about what is Eskom doing to accelerate and increase sales. I think, Chairperson, as I said, there are many factors. We do engage with customers in terms of their demand forecast, but I think there is this underlying reality based on the performance on the plant and the capacity that's available. There's only so much that Eskom can produce at this point in time. But we will definitely look at that and maybe look to respond also in writing in a bit more detail on those sales forecasts. But with regard to just this the 1 year, we believe that with all the factors that we understand, we believe it's prudent to keep the sales where we have it. We don't want to have a situation where sales are then aggressively overstated and then it impacts on subsequent RCAs. If I then go on to elasticity, Mr. Mkize, in one of the upcoming public hearings, we will then deal with the elasticity question in a bit more detail, and then also address the load shedding question that you've raised, Mr. Mkize. With regard to coal and the changing coal costs, like the one member has asked, I think Mr. Mkize asked, but why is the carbon tax and the levy? And I think Mr. Sambanda asked about coal costs increasing. Obviously, with the drop in the IPP volumes, some of that energy is picked up by increased coal production. That results in the increased coal costs. And obviously, if the coal stations are producing more, with that would go the corresponding environmental levy increase, and then obviously also that carbon tax increase will flow through. With regard to the return on assets, and as the member has asked, like we've indicated, we've taken the adjustment through to lower the negative returns and to migrate towards earning a positive return and cost reflectivity. I think the important point to highlight here that in our application, we've got debt service commitments of about 80 billion rand, and we'd like a large portion of that to then be recovered through the allowable revenue. In terms of EAF and use and useful, to Mr. Mkize, we have, as I said in our RAB, adjusted for technical obsolescence, which takes into account this use and useful element, and we've provided detail in our submissions on that. But we can also follow up that with more detailed written submission on that use and useful in terms of the regulatory asset base. Mr. Mkize, I think just to confirm and clarify, of the 9% allowable revenue that is linked to the total of Medupi, Kusile, and Ingula, only 4 billion of the 25 billion is the capital related, which will then be linked to the asset base, your use and useful principle, and then the returns. The other elements are obviously the running of the plant, the energy, the employee benefits, maintenance, etc. But only 4.5 billion of the 25 billion is linked to the pure capital related part included and what flows from that regulatory asset base for all three stations combined. If I look at Mr. Sibanda, is it a bleaker outlook? I would respond by saying, Mr. Sibanda, this is the reality of where Eskom finds itself today. The country is well aware of the performance of the generation fleet and the high utilization that we've presented in our annual results. We only presenting here the update for NERSA to take into account. In terms of the use of OCGTs higher over the next 3 years, and is that bleaker? Yes, we believe that reducing that cost will obviously have a benefit to the end consumer, but we are balancing supplying electricity versus the cost that comes with diesel, and the cost to the economy far outweighs this additional diesel cost that Eskom is incurring. I've done that. Let me just see. Chairperson and Madam Mponguse's question around Eskom needing to demonstrate that our costs are efficient in terms of capital and OPEX. As I've indicated, we believe as Eskom, we have put in a application that is efficient based on the future forecast, but we can also come back in a subsequent meeting to enhance on that, if you allow me, Chairperson. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kasim, and thank you for your responses. Indeed, we do have further engagement with yourself, so you will be able to further enhance the answers that you provided, and right at the end, you will then also be able to then wrap up all of the questions that have been asked. I am cognizant of the fact that we've actually gone way over in respect of the time allocated to yourself, but I will take Mr. Mkhize's last question, but I guess request that you respond to it in your input today or the day after. Mr. Mkhize.
Thank you, Chairperson. I do appreciate the lateness. I would ask if you can just please, when you're doing the presentations around the EAF, you can clearly demonstrate which plans are going to be deployed, the different units, so it comes out clear in terms of those plans being incorporated in terms of the RAB. And I would also appreciate that you provide a response to the question in terms of when are you going to be conducting a prudence assessment on all these plans. And lastly, please assist maybe to be forward looking in terms of when are we going to get out of the rut, if I can put it like this, because you're talking of high utilization. We've had load shedding that is blamed on having to do a lot of maintenance. But the same plants now are going to have high utilization, and we're going to get back to the same problem. So when are we going to get out of this whole problem in terms of your planning as Eskom? I think that will also be important. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mkhize. Mr. Kasim, I would assume that you'll be able to deal with those further questions in your next presentation.
I will do, Chair. Thank you for that.
Thank you, and thank you very much for your input. Looking forward to further input in the coming days of the week. Thank you, and now we'll then move on to the next presenter, and I'd like to also apologize for the delay in allowing you, Reverend Petros Gizman. If I can just perhaps then see you. Thank you, Reverend. You're not very visible. I think the camera, if you can just lift the camera a little bit. No. Thank you. Thank you. So before we start, can I ask if you'd object to taking an oath for an affirmation?
No.
Okay, with that, if you kindly raise your right hand and affirm the following. Do you solemnly declare that the information or the evidence that you are going to give to this panel is the truth and the whole truth as you know it?
I do.
For the record, please state your name, your organization, and your position therein.
Okay, thank you, sir. My name is Reverend Peter Scheisman. I am a minister of religion by profession. I'm situated in the Eastern Cape, and my presentation is regarding the religious group that is bringing their presentation to this meeting.
Thank you. We've allocated 15 minutes for your presentation. I'm not sure if you're making a verbal input or are you going to make a PowerPoint presentation?
Yeah. Okay, sir. I will do a verbal input, give a verbal input, and then I will give my presentation. I will send it to Mr. Dlamini after my presentation.
Thank you. Your 15 minutes starts now, sir.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. My presentation will be very brief. Let me start by reading my presentation. I take the opportunity to give my heartfelt appreciation to represent those who are in normal circumstances the voiceless, those who are the people on the periphery of society and who are overlooked in many instances. This presentation is an effort to give guidance to the National Energy Regulator of South Africa on the 20.5% tariff increase that is requested by Eskom to keep the lights on of the country. Yet, we are all aware that Eskom is struggling to keep the lights on. Eskom doesn't have much respect for the people of South Africa. And if my words are a bit harsh, please bear with me, because my presentation is what is at the heart of many of the local people. Load shedding sometimes happens when people plan for their day, and sometimes there's no proper announcement. So they would then hear that it will be load shedding. So what respect does this entity has for a nation who is struggling because of the decline in jobs, where people struggle to make a living? Chairperson, here in the local town where I am residing, I'm living in the Karoo in Cabernet in the Eastern Cape, and we rely on borehole water for human consumption. But when it is load shedding, the pumps are off and the water supply is poor. Sometimes there's no supply of water at all. The local municipality have to cart water to those affected areas. Say, a woman who had a hairdressing business had to stop operating the business because of load shedding. Something else that I experienced as a religious leader when I visit people, not only congregants, but people in the local community, is that those people, they are actually at the stage where they don't mind if there's load shedding. And these people, mostly in the poor areas, they will make a lighter fire to prepare their meals, and these fires has a tendency to make it difficult for these people to contain, especially when the wind is blowing. Chairperson, we are living in a time of a pandemic. Many of our people lost their jobs. Some have to take pay cuts, and our energy regulators should really consider the situation of these people. Because we are living in a country where justice for all people is of paramount importance, and to have sufficient electricity availability is part of the rights of all the people in this country. But our people in the rural areas, they are suffering. That's why they are making these open fires outside the houses. And as a faith leader, when I visit these houses where there's no electricity, they will just carry on like a candle to see something at night. So they are not actually worried about if there's electricity or not. Most of these people that I'm referring to are situated in the dense areas of society. And then further, say, preparing meals on an open fire needs wood, and this leads to environmental destruction as people have to chop down trees to make the fires. And the smoke from the fires is another cause of destruction to the ozone layer. So, dear Nessa, the poor people, they cannot afford a tariff increase. And there will be more of them. More people, even those who earn a monthly salary, won't be able in the near future to afford tariff increase or electricity at all. The truth is that we cannot rely on Eskom as a sustainable electric supplier. So NERSA and our government should think about renewable energy. People already struggle to make a living in this increases, and therefore we should think about renewable energy or other alternative ways, not a power boat at all, power ship. Chairperson, I've spoken to some people of faith from different walks of life. Only one of them replied by saying that the tariff increase can work, and I quote his response: if it means more people will get electricity, then I will be positive towards upping the tariffs now. We are being charged with very high tariffs already. And then he concludes by saying, I want to see more people enjoy electricity like I do. I've also spoke to some other faith people, and I would like to give their responses. Electricity should not increase because many people already struggle in these difficult financial times. It becomes too expensive to keep up with the high tariffs. Another one says, the answer is no, increase because we are already struggling in these trying times, and increases will just make poor people poorer. That is we who are on the floor, this is the people on the lowest part of society. Third person said to me, I don't think that this tariff should increase at this stage because the country struggled financially to cope after the devastating impact of COVID-19. And the communities are just not in a position to afford a tariff increase. Many businesses who already suffers will have to close their doors. Somebody else? I will just read this one as well. My understanding and view as an ordinary citizen of South Africa is that Eskom has no leg to stand on when it comes to arguing for tariff increase. The information available to the general public indicates that Eskom is trying to run a power utility that is poorly managed, and it should have been replaced ages ago. The carbon footprint it leaves much to be desired, and simply is no longer sustainable if it wants to compete in market-related economy. Eskom is, as far as I am aware, the only company who raises tariffs in a shrinking market, and as a society suffering 35% of unemployment, as millions of South Africans reliant on SASSA grants. It is a sad situation that, according to mainstream media, Eskom has been milked dry by organizations and individuals using it as a convenient ATM. My view be that Eskom must first get to a point where it is properly managed and do what its first intention was at the inception. That is to serve the people of a country. There's no way that they can ever expect people to simply expect year-on-year tariff increases with a product is growing weaker and more irrelevant on a daily basis. South Africans are on their knees in trying to keep up with an economy that is weakening by the day, and also have to keep up with food and utility price hikes every other day. Chairperson, the track record of Eskom is not of the best. Looking at the first report of the Zondo Commission, where we read of irregular expenditure. Dear Nersa, can I conclude? As a faith leader who is in close contact with people and their circumstances, I propose Eskom should not increase its tariffs. Please use your moral conscience and take into consideration the condition of the poorest of the poor. We don't trust Eskom. Reading about the warning of the unavailability of the Kuberg nuclear power stations units 1 and 2 this year for refueling, and it makes us immediately feel that here comes load shedding along with a tariff increase. Chairperson, I thank you.
Thank you, Reverend. Yes, your point has been well made. I would then request my colleagues, if they've got any particular questions, comments that they may want to pose to the Reverend, to please do so. Any questions, members of the panel? If not, okay, Mr. Nkiza, you can shoot, sir.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, and thanks to the Reverend. From my side, it's mainly a comment to say that we are very appreciative of the involvement of the faith communities on these issues, because they do affect their members as such, and really doing the word. I would also highlight the fact that we've got the team, like I know of people like Visa, Amanda, that are working, Vera, and Amanda, that are working in terms of stakeholder engagement. And I think it would be important to also engage outside of this process, so that when you come to this stage, there are also a lot of other issues that can come up in their presentation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Nkiza. I assume no further comments from the panel. Reverend, I do have one question. And the question emanates from, we know the concerns by communities that say, we've come to present to NERSA on these issues many times before. And you still, as NERSA, go ahead anyway and just approve the tariffs, even if we had said no increase or whatever the issue might be. What is the, what is the point? And so that is the premise from which I'm posing this question. That says, we are operating in a legalistic environment. Things that are informed by law, we always quote sections of the Electricity Regulation Act. We quote an approved methodology, which then becomes part of the regulatory framework. The question I think that we would like to be assisted with, in your opinion, Reverend, how do we balance the issues of morality versus rands and cents published and approved methodologies? Is there anything that you can guide us on here that says, as you know, we went to court and seeking to change the methodology? Unfortunately, we didn't perhaps do a good job as NERSA and as also in terms of doing that as well. But however, we have an obligation to implement a methodology. In your opinion, how do we balance the interests of all those that have come forward to express the unaffordability, the undesirability, the unjustness, as somebody has put forward yesterday? How do we balance that with the law? What's your view? Thanks.
Chairperson, thank you. As a religious person, for most of us, and I think, and I take the liberty to say that it's not only Christianity. I'm speaking on behalf of all people of faith. We would say that there's many ways to the center when we worship. So the methodology is like you are busy doing consultation with local people like us, people who are more equipped in a technical way, people who are scientists, and get their opinions so that you can go ahead with a methodology. I think one word that stands out in answering your question is the issue of ethics. Ethics is the basic principle of what we believe and what we trust and what we stand for. And of departure is what you take to court, or what you decide, or what you do. Is it in the interest of the people of South Africa, and is it an ethical decision that you can live with for the next 10 years and answer for the generations to come in future? I hope I answer your question.
Yes, we have, and I really appreciate your input. And I say it's about ethics, and most decisions are influenced by ethics, guided by ethics. Thank you for your input. Thank you, Reverend. We really appreciate your inputs. Thank you very much. Okay, we will then move on again to another input from, and if you can mute yourself, Reverend, I appreciate that. If we can now move on to another presentation by a spiritual leader again, from also South African Faith Communities Environment, Miss Maria Odendaal. If you can come on the screen now. Thank you. Can I, before we start, ask you if you object to taking an oath or an affirmation?
Chairperson, as a Quaker, I would affirm I would not take an oath.
Yes. Can you then kindly then affirm the following? Do you affirm that the evidence or the information that you're going to give to this panel is the truth and the whole truth, as you know it?
Chairperson, I do. I wish I knew the whole truth, but as I know it, I do.
As you know it, yes, it is from your own point, from your vantage point. Can we then put the record, if you can kindly state your name, the entity that you are representing here today, and your designation therein, please.
Thank you, Chairperson. I've come to these hearings through SAFC, and I want to state that I fully align myself with the written submission that SAFC made to NERSA. I am a member and the co-clerk of the Quaker community in KwaZulu-Natal, which is part of the larger Quaker community in Southern Africa.
All right. Now, thank you. With that, you've got 50 minutes to make your input, and your 50 minutes starts now. I assume it's going to be a verbal input.
Chairperson, thank you. I did prepare PowerPoint slides. I was only able to send them in at the very last minute, and I see that I don't have a screen share capability here. Mr. Dlamini has that presentation, but I'm happy to proceed without it. I'll just have to keep referring to it on my own screen.
All right. Can I maybe just request Gerard to please assist, if we can maybe flight it from your side, and Ms. Odena will be able to then talk to it. Gerard, please assist if you can, or grant the rights to load, please. It might be simpler though, Gerard, if you load it from your side. I'm assuming, Gerard, you can hear me. If not, I think if you can continue, we will actually have to visualize it. Thanks.
I'll do so, Chairperson. So I started off by asking, should NERSA approve Eskom's proposed tariff increases? And I've already indicated that I'm a Quaker and I've come to these hearings through SAFC. I want to say a little more about my frames of reference. The Quakers have a concern for peace and social justice, and we seek in both our lived everyday lives and in the work we do to reduce poverty and inequality on systemic and community and household levels. So I also, out of this concern for peace and social justice, I've been working for many years on a non-profit organization, a peace education organization called Sivuselela Ubuntu, Alternatives to Violence Project, the KZN network of AVP. There's a national network of AVP organizations that exists in Johannesburg and Cape Town and Port Elizabeth, and I'm in the KZN one. I'm a founder of this organization. And we're also part of an international movement of alternatives to violence. So we're concerned about both structural and interpersonal violence. And I would see the deep inequalities and the poverty in our society as being very much a part of systemic and structural violence. The work we do is conflict transformation and training in Msunduzi, eThekwini, and surrounding and rural areas of KZN. So I'm simply saying these things to indicate that those are the frames of reference from which I draw my particular perspectives and the information and thoughts that I'm presenting today. So my response to the question is no to across-the-board tariff increases. And the key reasons I want to put forward are that national, provincial, and local unemployment and poverty levels make even the current tariffs unaffordable for many. And energy is a basic requirement. So payment for electricity and for energy is at the expense of fundamental needs, such as basic nutrition. The second key reason is the systemic problems that are plaguing energy provision in South Africa. The mismanagement and the corruption from national Eskom through to municipal levels. The systemic failures in providing electricity to people. These make it impossible for Eskom to guarantee and for the public to believe that the increased revenue is actually going to produce reliable access to and delivery of energy. So there's some additional factors I would like to mention here. And I'm speaking very much also from a KZN context, but also nationally. In this country, we have major social, political, and economic instability. And here in KZN, we're sitting on a volatile, rumbling volcano. And I think we're all aware of the political issues and divides within KZN. The environmental issues are another factor that are of deep concern here. That Eskom continues to pursue and put resources into fossil fuel energy, despite global warming, which is a well-established fact by now. It's not something that certain scientists have dreamed up. So despite global warming, climate change, and our own government policy of a just and rapid transition to green energy, Eskom is continuing to persist with putting resources that come out of the pockets of the consumers into fossil fuel energy. So that's kind of framing things. And I want to frame them in terms of the big picture. We all know that COVID-19 has had a massive impact on economies at all levels, from global, national, provincial, local, and household. I also want to raise the issue of the impact of July 2021 looting and arson, which happened mainly in KwaZulu-Natal and also in Gauteng. And then recently, the changes in weather patterns. As from the beginning of last year at the very latest, the storms and flooding that have affected in particular this province, but also others like the Eastern Cape, have had very destructive impact on households, on agriculture, and on the economy. And then the fourth element of this big picture I want to put forward is the unemployment crisis and the low baseline wage crisis. And I'm drawing here quite a lot on an organization called Pietermaritzburg Economic Justice and Dignity. So they indicate to us that the average Black South African household, one person works to support about 4.3 people. That's usually the only person working in that household. So there are households that are much bigger than 4 or 5 people. At the maximum national minimum wage level, after transport to work and electricity costs, on average, such a family will have left over about 1,652 Rand and a few cents. If all of that were used for food, Chairperson, and we know that that's never the case, because people have many other needs besides transport, electricity, and food. But if that 1,652 were used for food in such an average household, 4.3, I don't know what the point, how one talks about 4.3 persons, but that's stats for you. Then there would be 384 rand and a few cents per family member for a month's worth of food. Chairperson, I don't think any of us who are here in these hearings could actually survive or countenance feeding our families on that. And 384 rand 28 cents is 38% less than the lowest food poverty line. The food poverty line currently is at 624 rand per person per month. And I'll explain that food poverty line a bit more later. The basic nutritious diet for a child in December 2021 was 747 rand 95. And we know there's a very high level of malnutrition and stunting amongst our children, especially children under the age of 5, which is when there is absolutely the greatest need for good nutrition, even while a child is still in utero. That affects their cognitive development, it affects their physical development, it affects them in every aspect of their development. So let me come and paint a bit of a picture of KwaZulu-Natal and the municipality where I live, in Pietermaritzburg, in Msunduzi municipality. A province and a municipality in distress. And we're not alone in being in distress. But if we look at the Stats SA, the KZN population in 2019, Stats SA regarded 38.7% of KZN's households being lower income. What does lower income mean? It's less than 54,000 per annum or less than 5,000 rand per month. 87.6% of KZN population are African. 60.4% were dependents. A third of them were 14 years old or younger. And that's about 6 million children, Chairperson. And the latest COVID-19 stats, 15,587 deaths, 34,719 active cases in KZN. Our municipalities, 10 municipalities in KZN are under administration or under intervention of some kind. They're mostly rural municipalities. 12 more are categorized as distressed, and many of these municipalities have Eskom debt. In Msunduzi, we're under admin again due to political factionalism and ANC. You have to come to this ironically named city of choice and see the litter and the filth in the streets, see the potholes, experience the frequent power outages, the load shedding, the really, really poor administration of the municipality to comprehend the irony of the name City of Choice. According to COGTA, Msunduzi has just settled its Eskom debt. I find that actually surprising. My question would be, at what and whose expense has that been done? And Msunduzi, I need to point out, appears not to provide any free basic energy to its users. Saying a little more about KZN and Msunduzi, the 2021 looting and arson, job losses were estimated at 123,000. This is not only the big cities that were affected, 55% of rural towns were reportedly severely affected. Storms and flooding, I've never known such a wet end of year and festive season. The tomatoes in my garden all got the blight. Everything has been rotting from the rain. If you go and Google what is happening in Ladysmith right now, Chairperson, Yesterday, the entire CBD of Ladysmith was flooded. People were walking up to their chests in water. It was impossible to get from one side to the other unless you were taken by a boat. People were stuck in their houses with their children, with no food. Food had to be ferried across by boat. The severe storms we had recently, the estimated damage was 50 million. And in the agricultural sector, 3,500 hectare crops destroyed, 697 livestock, and 110 of the infrastructure, roads, and other structures. Farms were not operational and employees without income. An estimated 2 billion rand to get the infrastructure going after recent storms. And of course, all of this means price increases in food and imminent food shortages. We are a province in distress. Msunduzi alone had a 38.5 million rand overtime bill after a recent massive hailstorm. 15.4 million in aid to households. I've talked about poor infrastructure maintenance. There was a substation that caught fire recently. The residents of Northdale, which is a relatively poor, but not the poorest by any means, part of Pietermaritzburg, were without power over Christmas and New Year for a period of more than 2 weeks. And in Msunduzi, the poorer rural areas have daily and weekly power outages. We are a municipality in distress. So, Chairperson, I said I'd explain what the food poverty line is. It's a monetary instrument. It's used to measure the cost of a basket of food and whether people can afford it or not. And Stats SA updates this food poverty line annually in April based on the CPI's food and inflation figures. And we all know that there are other ways also of calculating inflation that would give us higher inflation figures than the CPI. April 2021 food price inflation, Stats SA.
Madam, I'm sorry to cut
Yes.
in, but
Yes,
your 15 minutes is up. So if we can maybe just move towards closing.
Try and
really
wrap up.
appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, I will jump quite quickly then. Yeah, the food poverty line had a 66.7% adjustment from April 2020 to 2021. So it's now 624 Rand per person per month. The child support grant, of course, is much less than that. It's only 460 Rand. And the social relief distress grant is 44% below the food poverty line. So I want now very quickly to just offer 2 case studies for Msunduzi households. The one has 7 people, 5 adults, 2 children. The only working person is a widowed state pensioner who works 1 morning per week, domestic work, and they have 1 child grant in that family. They live 25 kilometers out of Pietermaritzburg in Taylor's Holt. Their income consists of an old age grant, a wage, a child grant, and it comes to a total of 3,920. They have prepaid electricity, which costs them 500 a month. That's for lights and basic appliances. They don't have a geyser or anything like that, right? They transport 264. So their subtotal is 764 Rand before we talk about food and all the other expenses. The balance left over to them is about 3,156. But the food poverty line for this family would be 4,368. Not only this, but they have no free electricity from using the prepaid card. and their power goes off daily from 5 till 9 o'clock in the evening. And this pensioner, if she were being paid the national minimum wage, her income would reduce to 2275. So she's being paid above the minimum wage. The other case study, very quickly, 4 unemployed adults, 1 a qualified social worker trying to study for a master's degree. They live in Mbali BB section. They have about 600 Rand a month income, to my knowledge. And I want to give a quote. Electricity costs? No, I don't get free electricity. I'm still experiencing load shedding 3 times a week for 2 or 5 hours. You can't believe that the 50 Rand prepaid card only lasts for 3 days, which is very traumatic. This also forced us to be selective when it comes to cooking. For instance, we rarely cook samp because it takes some time to get ready. Obviously, the impoverished people are the most vulnerable ones. I think I'm coming to my, the likely results of the increases. Obvious, poor households become poorer. Basic nutrition is going to suffer, increasing in ill health and stunting. People are using very harmful cooking methods like paraffin. Basic needs are not being met. They're making more illegal connections with the attendant danger of injury and death. And those happen quite often in Sinduzi. And in the bigger picture, there's much more economic hardship and social instability. With the increased food prices, increased social unrest and protest, especially if load shedding continues, and increased crime. So in my conclusion, I've said that both Eskom and municipalities have to put their houses in order. And Chairperson, I think by that I mean there actually needs to be a whole mindset transformation and a systemic transformation around the whole issue of energy provision. Plus, we have to actually stop corruption and mismanagement, because the public will not accept these price increases when they believe that the money is being stolen and mismanaged. We need energy justice, because all households should have access to and be able to afford electricity, not at the expense of other basic needs. The poor must not be penalized for their poverty. And we need a shift to green, clean energy based on the IPPs, not nuclear. And I would say to NERSA, please do not approve across the board 20.5% increases. If there need to be increases, it should be a sliding scale payment. To quote my colleague from Cape Town, Jen Stern, first bit free, second bit cheap, third bit more expensive, and fourth bit very expensive. And that is the big consumers, especially those who are exporting cheap energy. Thank you, Chairperson, and apologies for going over the time.
Thank you, ma'am, for your input. Yes, you unfortunately we are indeed well over time. Colleagues, there is an input from Ms. Odendaal. So, any questions for her? Comments, perhaps? If there are any particular areas of clarity, Mr. Sibanda?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Ms. Odendaal. Chairperson, I don't have a question as such, but I think it's quite clear, perhaps, that there are challenges with respect to accessing the free basic electricity. I suppose it's an issue that colleagues in electricity might have to follow up, but not only NERSA, but I think Eskom as well. It's quite clear that there is an affordability challenge, and perhaps Eskom can also come in here. But Chair, I think from our side, with respect to free basic electricity, I think it's something that we can follow up later. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Sibanda. Any other comments, colleagues, inputs from your side? Ms. Mpungose?
Thank you, Chairperson. Just to thank Madam Marie Odendaal for her presentation. I think it's quite clear that she's working quite close with communities. So she knows the plight of communities, their, financial strain and how they're battling with the availability of limited energy or unaffordability of energy. So all her submissions have been taken into account and will be considered by NERSA, and we thank her greatly for the comprehensive presentation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I think I would reiterate the points raised by my colleagues to just thank you for your inputs, and I guess also just to appreciate the fact that for consumers out there, the divide between Eskom and municipalities and government and NERSA in terms of responsibilities and whatever seems it is an artificial divide. If you're a poor community needing assistance and only earning income from an income grant, is that's all the income you see, and all of the issues that, and the fact that perhaps technically we can then say, even as Eskom, and say, unfortunately, the issues you may be raising around Msunduzi might well be outside of the realm of their application. They would say, as far as consumers out there, that is just an artificial divide. But we'd like to thank you for your input, madam. And we're hoping that at some point these national problems can find a resolution, because as you rightly point out, what happened in July is not too far from reacting again. As you say, KZN is a province in distress, and that is something that we are well aware of, I think, as a whole country. And it's not maybe just KZN, but KZN perhaps it is at a boiling point. I will thank you for your input, Ma'am.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. All right, as we move on to the next presenter, we'll take a break, a 5-minute break after the next presenter. The presentation is coming from Mr. Brian Kamanzi. I'm assuming that I did see him signing in maybe yesterday, I don't know. Thank you, Brian.
Yes.
Okay, then you are going to be making a presentation, I assume. So whilst we are swearing you in, if you can maybe just make if you can then prepare to make the presentation. Would you object to taking an oath or to affirm? If I can still see you, Brian, I do need to see
no,
you
sir.
for this part.
Okay.
I do need to see you for this part.
All right. I don't object.
All right, thank you. But can I see? Okay, thank you. I can see you now. Please raise your right hand and affirm the following. Do you solemnly declare that the information or the evidence you're going to give to this panel is the truth and the whole truth from your point of view?
I affirm to the best of my knowledge.
For the record, if you can state your name, the entity you are representing, and your designation therein, please.
My name is Brian Kamanzi. From the Institute for Economic Justice and Energy Policy Researcher.
Thank you. Brian, you've got 15 minutes for your presentation, but I'm not sure if you're making a physical presentation or you're making a verbal. Are you
a physical one? If I can share my screen?
Okay, if you can do that. I'll tell you if we can see it.
Just confirm when it's sharing.
It is coming up. Yes, it is now visible. So your 15 minutes will start now.
Greetings. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate the opportunity to present to you all. My name, as I said, is Brian Kamanzi, Energy Policy Researcher at the Institute for Economic Justice. Just a brief word about the IEJ. The IEJ is a not-for-profit organization which provides analysis designed to equip policymakers, progressive social forces, and the public with policy options that address the scourge of poverty, underdevelopment, and inequality in South Africa, the region, and the African continent. Some introductory remarks before I lead into some overriding concerns with the submission for the increase, and I will close with some recommendations to this for consideration by this committee. This communique calls for a rejection of the proposed increase, and I will provide motivation therein. The economic impact of the measures to curb and control the spread of COVID-19 over the past 2 years has compounded deep, long-existing structural failures in the South African economy. South African economy has contracted by 1.5% in the third quarter of 2021 and is 3.1% smaller than it was before COVID. The unemployment rate continues to break records. It said that 660,000 people have lost their jobs in the third quarter of 2021, resulting in an unemployment rate of 34.9% narrowly defined, and more accurately 46.6% by the expanded definition by the third quarter of 2021. It's against this backdrop that this document, that our submission rules that recommends that this proposal to increase the price of electricity be set aside. The brutally unjust apartheid system, which helped consolidate the energy system we have today, built its industrial base of the availability of cheap black labor and its ability to exploit the immense natural resources of the country. The old regime consolidated and accelerated uneven development, which remains intact owing to failures of the post-democratic era to date. In the electricity sector, the turn to democracy heralded expansions in electrification, basic service provisions, and a variety of social protections and regulations to ensure human and environmental well-being, many of which fall under the purview of this committee. As evidenced by the growing prevalence of service delivery protests and campaigns of various forms, and many submissions we've heard today and already throughout the week, energy poverty remains one of the key areas of hardship and sources of discontent in our society. The proposed increase in the order of 20% will only stand to widen the immense social cleavages that our nation is faced with. Unaffordable and increasingly unreliable electricity has also been one of the many factors that have contributed to the industrializing the South African economy. This has been marked by the collapse of large portions of the manufacturing base, and Eskom's MYPD5 analysis also fails to acknowledge some of the trends, structural trends within the economy, which include turn towards financialization and short-term profiteering by big capital, and an awareness that capital investments have moved from productive industries towards, as I mentioned, short-term profiteering, which directly implicates the electricity industry and directly implicates the IPP program in particular. This has received no critical reflection. Hello, sir.
Brian, sorry to disturb you a bit here. I'm not sure whether you are still on slide one on the. I'm not sure whether.
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Yes, I'll move quickly through, but I'm intended to be here. Yes.
All right. Okay.
Okay. As evidenced by Nedlac's Eskom social compact, there is a recognition from unions, the private sector, and governments that in order for the economy to course correct, reliable and affordable electricity must be assured. Any path to achieve this, though, cannot condemn large parts of our country who are battling to meet ends meet. Just very briefly, an overview of some concerns, some overriding concerns with the application. We will prepare another presentation when I think the MYPD5 as a whole comes open for public comment. But just to acknowledge here that the MYPD5 will be a critical point in the energy transition and the energy reform process, the tariff reform process. And so the implications of the decision go far beyond just the increase of the 20%. That to acknowledge that IPPs collectively account for the single largest source of the increase, and that the alarming rise in electricity prices will continue with the expansion of IPP programs. And we're getting little sense here about whether there is scope for a question of the logic of this development pathway, and whether this has been brought into question. If consumers are already feeling that the prices on the table are too much to pay, if we expand the use of IPPs, electricity prices will increase. The energy transition will involve an increase in electricity prices. And we must meet our environmental obligations, but can consumers afford to pay the costs? It seems clearly not so, especially in the context of the economy today, as I outlined in the introduction. Transparency is also a major issue. Non-disclosure agreements within the IPPs and in the existing PPAs limit the public's ability to scrutinize decisions. And we've been asked to comment on the 20% increase. One of the largest sources of the increase are IPPs, but we can't even see the tariffs per project. We can't even see what are the status of some of the IPPs that have been promised year-on-year increases. Are those year-on-year increases aligned with inflation? What are they pegged against? We can't comment on that. So how can we comment on whether or not it's fair to increase prices and allow the pass-through to take place at 20%? We want to challenge some of the assumptions on sector financing. So central to the application is recognizing the need for Eskom to meet its debt agreements. It's unclear from their application whether they have exhausted the renegotiation options with creditors, an acknowledgement of local conditions and a global recession. So I'll summarize these points in a second, but want a sense from Eskom that they have exhausted discussions with creditors to renegotiate the terms of debt repayments in light of the state of our economy. Eskom should approach government to secure state bonds and pursue other forms of low interest from state-backed debt to refinance existing obligations and reduce the cost of capital for strategic projects, including refurbishments and maintenance. And Eskom, it's noted that Eskom asserts in its analysis that the burden of tariff increases will be lower than pursuing government subsidies to meet the shortfall. It's, however, unclear what the basis of this claim is rooted in, and it's. I would recommend that in order to really determine on that, Eskom must provide and justify this analysis in writing, public scrutiny. Be happy to respond thereafter. The impact on municipalities has been discussed at length today. Of course, with some of the legacy of our past, we must acknowledge the inequalities both within and across municipalities, that there will be differentiated impacts of this increase that must be taken seriously. It's alleged that Eskom is owed the order of 35 billion rand from outstanding municipal debt, with a 7 billion rand increase from 2019 to 2020. This year-on-year increase will only increase with the proportion will only increase, and we anticipate that underfunded municipalities, their debt burden will disproportionately increase because they have a low likelihood of recouping costs from their residents. The MYPD5 also itself underscores the differentiated impact of increases on municipalities by showing that larger, more wealthy municipalities like City of Cape Town and Johannesburg have been adding additional costs on top of Eskom increase, which they, in their own words, have stated that they have unduly benefited from price increases in the order of 46 billion over 10 years, half of which coming from the aforementioned municipalities. So the question is, how does this proposal intend to engage with the inequality between municipalities that this increase will have between municipalities? An overview of the recommendations, there are 5. So Eskom, first and foremost, Eskom should be compelled to pursue and fully exhaust debt refinancing, debt forgiveness options, and approach government for additional low-cost funding to meet interest and debt obligations, in alignment with concerns echoed by trade unions NUM and NUMSA in the Eskom wage negotiations. Prior to any increases, Eskom must renegotiate standing IPP contracts and reduce the inflated costs from private procurement. 3, NERSA should call for an urgent revision and expansion of FBE, free basic electricity, to buttress the working class households from the brunt of the continuous increases in the near-term horizon. Since the establishment of the scheme, no significant revisions have been made. It is clearly no longer fit for purpose, over and above the need for improved monitoring and assuring that what has been allocated arrives at households. NERSA should reject the principle of cost-reflective tariffs and request further economic modeling be conducted to determine a national framework of tariff subsidies. This argument would move that it is indeed true that a more cost-reflective tariff would be more expensive, that would put the price of electricity beyond the purview of what most South Africans can afford. Electricity is a basic right. Therefore, electricity in our country, in our context, needs to be subsidized. So the move towards cost-reflective tariffs is not appropriate. And there has been no proposal of an FBE scheme that would circumvent the issues, the access issues. There's simply no justification for that. 5, NERSA should request the immediate commissioning of a public report. So one of the key assumptions here is the EAF of Eskom's existing fleet. And there have been a number of very inflammatory comments, one could say there are inflammatory comments that have been made about the causes of load shedding, potential sabotage, and so on. Those must be justified. We want a detailing of the public release of the detailing of the maintenance history of all these plants, and future and public release of a strategy that outlines maintenance planning. There should be an accompaniment of a determination of realistic energy availability targets for Eskom's fleet for the next 5 years. It's clear that the current targets have been beyond reach. So I would, if the chair would allow me, I'm ready for questions, but I will leave this slide with the recommendations up that the committee can, if they would like to engage further on.
Thank you very much. You have given us, you're just on time, so that's great. You've given us 3 minutes back. Members of the panel, if you can engage, and you are free to leave the slides on the screen, Mr. Kananzi. Colleagues, we have the presentation before us. These are the recommendations that are being made. Care to engage? Okay, Mr. Mkhize first.
Thank you, Chairperson, and thanks, Brian, for the presentation. I note the issues that you are raising, that Eskom, as they are also present, will take due cognizance thereof. With regard to renegotiating the IPP contracts, as well as the revision and overhaul of the three basic electricity allocation, with also the principles of cost-reflective tariff, which is embedded in the electricity pricing policy. I just want to ask from your side, if do you have, especially with regard to cost-reflective tariff, first of all, do you have maybe a time frame that you are looking at in terms of that principle being put aside of cost-reflective tariffs, or you just want it put aside altogether, rejected altogether, and not being brought back into the policy? And then to also ask if on all these issues, because they talk more to the policymaker, if you have ever engaged the policymaker in this regard from your side, because the policymaker is also, normally there are people from the side that also sit in these public hearings. But I just want to know from your side if you have engaged the policymaker with regard to this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mkhize. Mr. Sibanda.
Thank you, Chairperson, and thank you to Mr. Kamanzi. Chairperson, my question overlaps with what Mr. Mkhize has asked. Yes, these issues are actually contained in the electricity pricing policy, and as a regulator, I'm not sure how Mr. Kamanzi suggests we should go around those. But my question really is, do you think that there is a trade-off between cost reflectivity as well as cross-subsidization of tariffs? If you look at what the policy provides for, indeed there is cross-subsidization, but also the whole principle of cost reflective tariffs is also embedded there. Do you think that the two should actually there's a trade-off between the two, or is it something that you think we should, as you're advocating that there shouldn't be cost reflective tariffs altogether, regardless of the fact that there is also cross-subsidization in the tariff structures? Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Banda. Any further questions from colleagues? If not, if maybe you can just also respond to two of my questions. The first one is, I guess, feeding off the questions that have been asked by my colleagues as the first question. Let's say, the question I'm asking, in your opinion, is the problem here one of cost reflectivity, or is the problem in terms of the level of cost? That perhaps is it the issue about the prudency of the costs and the level, or is the problem one of cost reflectivity? If you can maybe, from your point of view. And then secondly, maybe I heard you incorrectly. If maybe you can comment on this. The view is that the more IPPs that come on stream, the lower would be the price. Do you agree with that sentiment? And if so,
no, it's the opposite, Chair.
If you don't agree with it, also if you can indicate why. Because the view out there is one that says, give us more IPPs and the price will come down. If you're not agreeing with that fact, why don't you agree? And how would you suggest that we actually tackle the problem going forward? Over to you, sir.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity to respond. I'll start with the last two questions and then close with the question on time frame. Is the problem cost reflectivity or the level of the cost? So my opinion is that it is both, but fundamentally, South Africans cannot afford a more cost-reflective tariff. So that is to say, there are cost-cutting measures that can and must be explored. There are prudency levels that must be engaged. However, there also has to be an acknowledgement that the energy transition is one element. There are existing inefficiencies that are unavoidable that must be attended to. For South Africans to pay, if South Africans are saying, and we've heard a lot of inputs from communities, their representatives, that the increase is unaffordable. It's not many people are struggling with the cost of electricity. It's not a stretch to say we cannot afford to pay cost-reflected tariffs. This is part of the argument. The majority cannot afford to pay that, and it is to say that I accept from the MYPD5 that to pay a more cost-reflective tariff will mean increases, and particularly so with the transition, with the move towards more wind and solar, and also, as Eskom has stated, gas. Highly volatile prices will likely be incredibly volatile, as we're seeing across Europe and China. I will hopefully have an opportunity to make a point around cost-reflective tariffs more strongly and this attends to the question on timeframes, when the MYPD5 as a whole is being discussed, because I think that principle is tied to the question of unaffordability, and it will be insufficient to reduce, even if we were to set aside the 20% for this year. If you accept the principle of cost reflectivity, tariff prices in South Africa will become more expensive. It's as simple as that. For me, IPPs, if we move along the agreed upon path, which is to increase the share of IPPs, electricity will become more expensive. That is for a number of reasons. One of them is that we have legacy IPPs already. We have IPPs in the pipeline, particularly risk mitigation round beyond car power ships. All of them are expensive. All of them have 20-year PPAs. All of them hidden under non-disclosures. The greatest share of the use of we are paying for private projects. We're paying for healthy returns from their investors. We can absorb the cost of these projects by this is a broader argument, by expanding the public fleet using a variety of generation technologies, and so that we are not creating a situation where we're setting up multinational private financiers, both local and international, to finance over the provision of basic services. We're paying for the cost of delivering the service and for healthy returns for both local and international investors. Of course, it will be more expensive. It's more expensive internationally to operate an energy system like that. And that is precisely why we're seeing a turn towards more state-owned vertically integrated utilities that are being called for in Europe as a response to the rising electricity costs. So So yeah, so that is to say, I think there are structural issues here, and I think that this 20% should be set aside precisely because accepting moving in this path, it's not simply the year. There are massive structural decisions that are on the precipice of being taken that should be debated thoroughly, and we're being rushed into a decision which will have tremendous consequences for households.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. No, thank you. Thank you for your input, Brian. And I'm assuming that you have submitted a written comment also to NERSA. And if you have not, please do. But we'll then be able to separate those matters that are policy questions, and we'll be addressing those directly to the policymaker. All right. But with that, we'd like to thank you for your input there.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, we will be, can I then ask, we are 30 minutes behind schedule, but can I ask that we take perhaps a 5-minute comfort break? According to my clock, it is 16:32. If we can be back here at 16:37, and then we'll then take a presentation from eThekwini Municipality. Dr. Leon Chetty, if we can be preparing the presentation, please. So 16:37, if we could be back, please. Thank you. Let's take a comfort break. Welcome again. I'd like to welcome you back to this session. Hopefully 5 minutes was adequate. Not sure it was enough to make a cup of coffee or whatever, but nonetheless, let's push on. The next presentation is from eThekwini Municipality, Dr. Leon Chetty. Can I kindly see you, sir? Thank you. All right. Yes, no, thank you. Hi. As you would know, the starting point is, can I ask if you're objecting to taking an oath or to affirm?
No problem, but just to note that I'm a little bit tired as well, as sure as you and the rest of the team. Let's hope we can make it a little bit more engaging for the next 20 minutes I'm on.
All right. Okay. No, thank you. As a start, then if you can kindly raise your right hand and affirm the following. Do you solemnly declare that the evidence or the information you are going to give to this panel is the truth and the whole truth as you know it?
I do.
For the record, please state your name, the entity you are representing today, and your designation therein, please.
Leon Chetty. I represent eThekwini Municipality. I'm a life cycle specialist in the strategy office.
Thank you. Dr. Chetty, you've got 15 minutes for your presentation and a further 10 minutes for questions and answers. And I'm not sure if you are making a physical presentation, a PowerPoint presentation, or verbal.
I'm doing a PowerPoint presentation, not a PowerPoint, it's a report which has been already emailed to your team.
All right, no, that's fine. You've got 15 minutes, so you need to choose your presentation carefully. And your 50 minutes starts now. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Chair, obviously there's a significant content in this report, but again, we initially posed this report to our city manager, who has then subsequently recommended that this report be presented to NERSA. So the objective of the report was to considering the economic downturn of Durban metropolitan area, pandemic and other economic factors, a study was undertaken to assess the magnitude of the Eskom tariff increases that can be tolerated by the eThekwini municipality customers. Our key input data that we're using, one of the key input data we use is something called our income category data, that we get this from via our economic development unit. And basically what table 1 shows you is the different income categories that exist, and the number of, and then under this column 2014 to 2018 is the number of households that exist in each of those categories. And then we have what you should notice, like between 2014 and 2019, 2020, the number of households in category number 1, which is our extremely poor category, has been steadily decreasing over a period of time, thus showing that our pro-poor policies have been working, because at the same time, the number of households are increasing. The fact that we know now the number of households and the different income categories and the total number of households, we use that to calculate the total amount of money that's available in the entire city. This is the total amount of money available amongst the entire city. Why do we use household income as a basis? If you go to Appendix A1, I'll show you a picture of what's called a circular economy. And the nature of the way the circular economy works, by categorizing the income in any one of these major things, we'll get an understanding of what's happening, how much of money is available within the city. Having said that, now with that, we have the total available income that's available in the whole of city. Not all of that money is available to the municipality. A portion of it is. So the few things we should note: this is the total income that's available. This income is used to pay for, as per the Woodendal says, income is not just used to pay for municipal bills, but it's also used to live. So you buy food, you pay school fees, pay loans, cars, houses, etc. It's just to live. But we want to know, how does the total household income change, total available income at household level change? What we've seen between 2014 and 2015, there's been an 8% increase. What I share with you is only regarding eThekwini municipality and its citizens, right? And the households in there. We've seen an increase of 8%, then it started to sit at 6% year-on-year increase in household income, and in 2020 we had a decrease to -2%. This -2% is important. Obviously, in 2020 we have the pandemic and other economic downturns that occurred. So the amount of money started to decrease at a household level. We then want to say, okay, that's what the past looks like. How do we now project into the future? How much of money is going to be available? Because to understand how much of increase we can tolerate from Eskom or even from the municipality perspective, we need to understand how the economy can be forecasted to grow. So we looked at two ways of how the economy could grow. We looked at a pessimistic outlook and an optimistic. Remember, we said that household income decreased by -2%. On a pessimistic side, on an optimistic side, we go from -2% to 0%, 1%, steadily increasing year on year by 1%. Going to 9 and 10% is extremely optimistic because we remember the trend so far shows us a maximum of 8%. But let's just hope that our economic policies, both at a national, provincial, and local government level, will work and give us this increase in household income. On a pessimistic side, we said we'll go from -2% to -1%, 0%, 1%, steadily increasing up to 9%. Some individuals have said your pessimistic outlook is too optimistic, and that could be true. But again, I want you to have a positive view of what the future could hold. So again, if you don't like this and we want to change it, we can easily change it. The financial model allows that to be quickly adjusted. If that is now, this is now what the forecasted total annual eThekwini municipality citizen or household income would look like. It'll go from roughly about 300 billion and steadily grow to about 500. But this again is not entirely for municipal bills. This is to live. This is for everything: your car, your school fees, food, etc. Right? Medical aid, etc. But a portion of this is expected to come to municipal bills. What is that portion? We looked at the number of 20%. The reason we looked at the number of 20%, if again you go to the appendix, we looked at a study done in Ukraine. Okay, we had to look at what was available. We looked at two studies, one in Ukraine and another in OECD countries, and we found that the two graphs here at the bottom, A2 and A3, does suggest 20%. It would not be unrealistic. But again, we should not be around 20%. We should actually be in the region of 10 to 15%. That leaves more disposable income for our citizens to live life and not just survive. But again, let's look at something. Let's look at 20%. Again, I'm saying that number is quite high, right? If that is the case, what that does is it now, from the total available income, we now are able to project what is our total municipal amount of money that we can extract. This now sets the envelope for the maximum budget the city could possibly have. And I'll share with you how, from a city budget perspective, we start going to electricity and Eskom bills. Okay, so this is the total envelope that's available for the total city budget. If the citizen available income is below this, then that means the citizen will be able to afford it. If the actual budget is below this, then this is what's available to the city. If what we eventually charge them is below it, then that means that the citizen will be able to afford that budget. So that's the key. You want to stay below those curves. But again, we're not just talking about all of city bills here. We're specifically talking about electricity bills. So the question is, what portion of the available budget or the available amount of money that's from citizens to us can we use? So we'll take 30%, 38%, and this is just trending what electricity has been taken out of it. But all this 38% of the total budget, not everything goes to Eskom. A portion of it goes to Eskom. Because the remaining portion goes for other issues that is important cost. So 68% of 38% of the available money is then available for bulk purchases. Then now that's the money that's available to Eskom, right? So this is the amount that is available going forward for Eskom. If that is the amount available, what can we say will be the actual amount Eskom is asking? If Eskom asks for an amount or paid over to Eskom is the amount that's below this, that means the citizen can't afford it. If it goes above this, the citizen will not be able to afford it. But for us to start looking at that, we have to look at what were what have we been paying Eskom so far? So we looked at our historical bulk electricity purchase between 2016 and 2020 in terms of rand value. We also looked at the amount of kilowatt hours that we purchased, and then we did what we did is just looked at dividing the rand that we paid over to Eskom divided by the number of kilowatt hours that we purchased, and that gives us our historical bulk purchases. This is not what we charge our customers, but this is what we pay over to Eskom on average in a given year. On average, you know, because you got the different tariff blocks, right? But this is on average what we're looking to pay per rand per kilowatt in a given year. Now, what we want to do is look at how has this number, the rand per kilowatt, how is that changing in relation to the change in income? Remember, earlier on, I showed you the change in the income was roughly about 5% year on year. What you start to see here is the change in the bulk electricity that we, as integrated municipality, buys from Eskom is higher than what the change in income is. Now, when your change in your expenses is higher than the change in your income, it will lead to what's called a liquidity challenge at a household level. A liquidity challenge at the household level will lead to a liquidity challenge at the municipal level. And that's what we've seen so far. But again, I'm not going to reiterate. I think many of the other speakers have already done that. The question is now, what can we go forward? What can our customers afford going forward? And we looked at different forecasted bulk electricity tariffs. So this is through an iterative calculation that I've done. We're saying, let's look at what you've already given us over. What can the customer now afford going forward? And we've got to these numbers here. Now, this is what we're saying. Let's look at, can the customer afford these types of increases, right? And when we did that forecasted increase year on year, this is what what's expected to be paid, what the customer can afford to pay over to Eskom as part of our bulk electricity purchases. Now the question is, can the customer afford this? Well, we have to compare this to an earlier graph which shows what's available for bulk purchases at a household level. And what we see in this graph is that only under the optimistic outlook will the customer be able to afford the bulk purchase. Our customers will be able to afford our bulk purchase from Eskom, right? But under the pessimistic scenario, by the year 2027, our customers will not be able to afford our bulk purchases from Eskom. And remember what we said previously, that our bulk purchases is our pessimistic outlook was actually very optimistic. So just bear that in note. But anyway, we've got some numbers and we start now starting to say these recommendations that our customers will afford a 7% increase in Eskom's bulk tariff. Now, one of the questions that people say, well, having a look at just customer affordability is only one part of the equation. The question is, what does that mean? What will happen to the Eskom business if we give them if they only get a 7% increase and they don't get a 20% increase? Well, for us to do that analysis, what we've done, Chair, I think I've got 3 minutes left. Am I right?
You've got about 4.
4, thanks. Yeah. So we looked at what impact will the 7% have on Eskom business. So that we did an analysis of Eskom's income statement at a group level. Very important, I'm saying this at a group level, to see what the 7% impact will be on their business. So we did an analysis. This is their revenue, other income. You can go into the integrated report, financial statements data, and you will come across this data, and you can correlate them. This is their revenue, historical revenue. And what we've done is that we've done a year-on-year change analysis. Guys, you're going to have to go through this. The data, the report is available, the figures are in there. This is of concern. The energy sales figures are decreasing. The change in Eskom sales are very erratic. And I want to make a comment at the end. The change in the average standard price is as follows. This is important. Comparing figure 17 and figure 15 is important, but I'll give you a summary of what all these figures say. This is a change in the average standard price. This is I want you to take away this, very important. Eskom's core business is to produce and sell electrical energy. The analysis of figures 13 to 18, sorry, somebody's mic is on, 13 to 18 reveal that although Eskom is increasing the price of its product, i.e. electrical energy, its customers in general are procuring less of its product. This is then resulting in reduced growth in its revenue. The above figures also illustrate that Eskom is propping up its revenue or concealing its reduced product sales figures by increasing the price of the product, i.e. increasing its tariff. The reduced product sales can be attributed to one of the following reasons. The requested product price is much higher than the price the customer is willing to pay, or the quality or reliability of the product is not to the satisfaction of the customer. Therefore, the customer is not choosing not to procure the product being offered. The above analysis suggests that Eskom needs to improve its product offering at the correct price, and it must stop escalating its prices to the point where the customer is choosing not to procure the product or procure less of its product. This point is further substantiated by the results illustrated in Figure 19, which illustrates the comparison of Eskom's actual tariff, average tariff received versus the Eskom average standard tariff price. And what this shows is Eskom is going to consistently ask for higher prices. But when you really do the analysis, you start seeing that what they receive is slightly lower. We look at the revenue received versus the kilowatts sold. Okay, so that's how the variation looks. I want to get really into what impact will it have with the 7% on Eskom's actual core business now. So we looked at a couple of things. We looked at Eskom's total operational costs by calculation and summing up the following: the primary energy, the employee benefit expense, and other expenses. These are looking at the changes, year-on-year changes, and the average contribution as total operating cost. We looked at the primary energy cost per energy sale. How has that been changing? Primary energy cost per energy sale has been significantly increasing. I want to show you what that was. Remember that household income was increasing at an average of 5% over that period, right? Over this period, Eskom's primary energy cost is increasing at 10% per annum. Now, I want you to note this here, because in the recommendations, this number plays an important role. In the employee benefit expense per employee per energy sales, we must understand Eskom's business and all the employees should be working for one primary objective: the production and supply of reliable electrical energy. So everybody should be either increasing sales or decreasing operating costs, right? So that's why I looked at employee benefit per employee per energy sale. And what we're saying is the following: the average employee basically how much of money they were getting paid per employee per energy sale is at 7% per annum. And we looked at other expenses, that's 4%, right? That's the change in other. This is your distribution and all other, whatever they group, and the CFO can tell us what they group under other expenses in the group statements. These are our final recommendations after the above analysis. We think that Eskom should be granted a 7% increase in its tariff price for each energy sales category for the financial year 2022/2023. Now, what will be the impact? The impact of the 7% increase on Eskom's forecasted financial stability. Figure 7, which is page 16, and table 9, page 22 of Eskom's distribution license submission to NERSA reveal the following information. It shows up standard customer sales, internal sales, and that power agreement that they have. They've got international sales and total external sales. Table 36 of page 75 of Eskom's distribution license submission to NERSA reveal the following information: the standard tariffs and the standard tariff volumes. What I want to show you something here, right, is I want to make a note, and I think one of the panelists asked this question: is Eskom's forecast correct? And in a nutshell, this is what we're saying. The results in table 9 reveal that if NERSA awards Eskom a 7% increase in 2022, then Eskom will receive 254 million rand in its standard tariff revenue, which will be 8 billion rand higher than their forecasted revenue. The difference in their revenue calculation is based on Eskom's understating the anticipated sales in their calculations. Now, what we're saying is Eskom's understatement in the anticipated sales in the calculations. You can analyze table 9 and table 9 and the tables above there to see how I've calculated them, and that will help you as well in terms of the forecasted. But the analysis so far shows Eskom is will be for a variety of reasons, but I'll come back to why I think they're understating it. They want a higher tariff. and to make a surplus. And the reason we will make a surplus is obviously what I'm going to share for. The tariff price increase of 7% should be granted if Eskom executive, now we should not just give them a tariff price increase of 7%. We should give them a tariff.
So can I ask that you wrap up? I've given you 3 more minutes on top of your time.
Apologies.
Yes.
So what we're saying, we would like the tariff price increase to be associated with performance indicators, not just give them 7% this thing. And I've highlighted what those performance indicators are and the fairness of the performance indicators. Okay. And we believe that their bonus should be based on achieving these performance indicators. It's a slight change of thought as previously done, but it's one of the ways we can ensure that cost-reflective tariff can be pursued, but it must be pursued while pursuing prudent cost recovery, prudent costs being expended, so that everybody works to improve the efficiency of Eskom, all the employees and all the executives. Thank you, Chair. I'm not going to go any further than that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so very much for your input. I'm sure my colleagues would like to engage with ask you questions on it. Colleagues, here you have a presentation from Dr. Chetty. Please engage with it. I know perhaps we ourselves as the members of the panel may not have an opportunity yet to engage with the detail, but we will before the process is finalized. Mr. Mkhize, you go first, sir.
Thanks, Chairperson, and thanks, Dr. Chetty, for the presentation. Although a bit difficult to digest everything in the short space of time and intelligently engage on this matter, I would like you to help us understand maybe the key assumptions behind the scenarios that you did paint, which resulted in the graphs that I think coming from graph 15 to figure 15 to 18, where you show the challenge of affordability based on the municipality and residents and how and what they could afford, so that one can also consider levers or that might be used to also improve the situation on the affordability side, right? And I would like you to expand a bit on the cost side for Eskom, particularly when one looks at the issue of the cost reflective tariffs. That yes, we should consider affordability, but let us also look carefully at the cost side. I didn't understand that portion very well. If you can maybe go back to that. And then I would also like to know, as a person that is in the municipality, to know as to what you then as the municipality, because what the customer experience, the price they pay is not just what we're dealing with here. There is also the retail tariff, which then the customer experience is more than what actually is being dealt with now. And the challenge is that sometimes municipalities have got surcharges, sometimes they are not doing well in terms of the FBE. Just to understand from your side as to what needs to be done in that regard, or what you as a municipality have done. Then lastly, on the primary energy side, increasing at an average percentage of I think 10 percentage points per annum. I would like to know from your side as to what do you suggest then how this could be remedied, particularly when it comes to the coal costs, which are dependent on the contracts that have already been signed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mkhize. Other colleagues, I'm not sure if there are any other questions. Maybe not. I have
Chair?
2 questions. Yes, Dr. Chetty.
The nature of Mkhize's questions were quite detailed, right? I understand that you have questions as well. Would you mind if I address him and then come back to your questions, or you want me to deal them as bulk?
I would like to deal with them at bulk and also to limit the time. Because remember, by the way, we can actually, as we pose those questions, we may also just require that you provide us your answers in writing. We may not be able to deal with all of the questions today verbally like this. So you need to select which questions you can respond to, so that we are conscious of the other people that still needs to present, if you don't mind. Okay, can I just pose two of my questions? Before I do, there is a question from Madam Pungwase. Madam Pungwase, if you can go.
Thank you, Chairperson. I actually don't have a question. Reason being, I struggled to keep up with the presentation by Dr. Chetty because it was quite technical, and I saw that, you know, below all the tables and the information he was giving some detail, but as I was trying to, you know, read and make sense of everything, then you find that we're going on to the next slide. So it's for that reason, I think I'll play it by the ear and hear how he engages with Mr. Mkhize's questions and your questions. Because personally, I wanted to understand the presentation comprehensively, having gone through it. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Madam. I think, Doc, it also talks to the issues I wanted to raise, that says, for us to be able to, some of the details that we may be seeking may well be in the document, and it's only when we engage with the document itself that we will be able to actually make true sense. But clearly, you can still highlight the issue that we may want us to actually look into. But can I just pose my two questions? The first question for me is a more fundamental one that says, as you know, our regulatory framework is, we model the cost on the supply side. Eskom says these are my costs, and the regulatory framework says, in terms of the relevant section of the Electricity Regulations Act, says, if my costs are deemed to be efficient, I'm entitled to have those costs to be remunerated, plus a return that is commensurate with my risk. So that's what the actual regulatory framework demands of us. However, what you've just done is done a very great analysis on the demand side to then answer the question that was posed by, I think, even yesterday, by the city of Cape Town, which is a bottom-up approach to say, how much can your consumers afford your product? Which, as they say, that in respect of any other commodity, that's how you would model things. Now, we don't do that. Not because we don't want to, but because our regulatory framework is such that it is electricity supply orientated rather than electricity demand orientated. So the question I'm asking, how would you suggest we incorporate your analysis in our decision-making framework? Great analysis, but how would you suggest that we incorporate it? That's my first question. My next question, Dr. Chetty, is one that simply says, I noticed you use this 20% of total income by consumers that will be available to pay for municipal services. And you are saying that you're basing this on the OECD countries. The question is that I ask is that a fair analysis that says, if we were to look at what the 20% of that revenue paid over to the municipalities, to municipalities, what it gets those communities, is it equivalent here in South Africa? Is it a fair analysis? Do we, as the consumers in South Africa, if we were to pay the equivalent of that 20%, would we receive the same or the similar type level of service as it's actually received? If not, is that therefore a good benchmark? Those are the two questions. But my plea is that answer them, but remember, direct us also to the reports. We will actually just give us a high level, and then we can actually look at the detail ourselves. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So Lovely questions, important questions. All of them are important. I think all of them deserve a good answer. So the challenge is I don't have enough time to discuss all of those questions, and I would really love to. But let me deal with the issue regarding the 10% that Muzi brings up. I think that's an important part of this thing. So Muzi, what I've done in analysis table 12, I looked at what is, and this will actually support what Brian Kamanzi just said, is that when you look at okay, you'll do an analysis of table 11, table 12, the thing from the data that's already submitted by generation license, you'll find that the IPPs are will increase the price of electricity by at least 15%. So the issue here is, as much as they are old, inefficient coal contracts, the coal contracts in themselves are not resulting in the substantial unaffordable increases, right? So what you could do, and if you remember, I've got this performance indicator. Muzi, I'm going to get to you as Chair. I'm going to get to your question while I'm dealing with Muzi's question. You asked the question regarding cost reflectivity, and how do we take into account this type of study that I've done now, which is affordability study, and how do we tie that up with the issue of cost reflectivity? Let's look at the underlying assumption of cost reflectivity. For just as a proviso, please note that I'm a former Eskom employee. I worked in Eskom between the periods of 2003 to 2010. I worked in for the grid planning, which is in the transmission business, and we understood Medupi and the assumptions under Medupi, the bringing online of Medupi and Kusile. When we were looking at this cost reflective tariff, it requires Eskom to have efficient costs. But right now, cost reflectivity has come to a point where it's called pass-through cost. It's not cost reflectivity, it's pass-through. The Eskom receives the cost and it passes through. Then when it comes to the question of efficient, we ask the question, Eskom, is it efficient? And Eskom says, yeah, trust me, I said it's efficient. It's efficient, but it may not be efficient. Now, therein lies the challenge. So in place of going and saying Eskom blindly, Eskom was asking for a blank check. There's a blank check. You said it, the cost, this is the pass-through cost. You say it's sufficient. We take your opinion on it. Therefore, we'll give it to you, right? In place of saying them that, let's say to them now, hold on. You are asking for this cost. The customer is asking, you are asking for 20%. The customer is saying 7%. Well, maybe both answers are not correct. Maybe the right answer is somewhere in between, and that's necessarily a difficult job. But do not give them that blank check, but give them a check that's based on conditions. And the conditions that I'm saying, without having to get into too much of technical details on how Eskom runs its business, because none of Eskom employees get paid high salary to manage their business. We'll give them performance indicators. They achieve those performance indicators, which are price-related performance indicators, then they've done their job. So that's the way you manage them as a shareholder. And I say shareholder, we pseudo shareholders through government. We manage them as this thing without having to get into the nuts and bolts of how they manage every single contract, because we don't have the time and sometimes the technical skills to do that type of thing. So how do we go forward? One, cost reflectivity and affordability. We've got to marry them and give them performance indicators. Is 20% fair? 20% of municipal of a person's income going to municipal bills? I can't answer that question. I really don't think 20% is fair. I think a number should be between 10 to 15%. But if you go for 10 to 15%, that means less money becomes, when you run the model, the financial model, less money becomes available to Eskom, right? But what will happen is there'll be more disposable income to give to the poor. Thank you, Chair. I'm going to stop there. I think I'll address the rest during a submission back to you.
No, thank you. That we really appreciate. It has taken. It is a technical presentation, and we'll request a time for us to engage with your document, and we may be able to then pose further questions to you in writing. But thank you for your input, Dr. Chetty. Very well received. Thank you. We now move to the next presenter, who is going to be Mr. David Hallois from Groundworks. If I can see you, sir. Thank you.
Hi, can you see me?
All right, now I can clearly see you now. Can you then perhaps, do you mind, actually, would you object to taking an oath or an affirmation?
I don't
Okay.
object.
All right. Please raise your right hand and affirm the following. Do you solemnly declare that the information or the evidence you are going to give to this panel is the truth and the whole truth?
I do.
For the record, please state your name, the organization that you represent today, and your designation there.
My name is David Hallows. I'm here for Groundwork, which is an environmental justice organization, and I do research for them.
Thank you. You have 15 minutes for your presentation. I'm not sure if you're making a PowerPoint presentation or a verbal one.
I do have a PowerPoint. I can do it verbally, but I'm not terribly sure how to show my screen.
All right, you don't, because it's, look, for the ease, because 15 minutes goes very, very quickly. If you can maybe just proceed and just make a verbal presentation, if you can. All right, thank you. Your 15 minutes starts now.
Thank you very much. Just to start off, very interesting to hear from Mr. Egweni. If their tariffs go up by at the moment we pay R2.08 for a kilowatt hour in Tegwini. If the tariffs go up by the same amount as the Eskom tariff in this application, that's 27.4 cents, then the tariff arrives at R2.35, and for a household consuming 400 units a month, that comes to 940 Rand. Yeah. If it goes up by the same percentage, by 20%, then we get to R2.50, and a household consuming 400 kilowatt hours, their bill goes up to 1,000 Rand, and that is half a pension. By the time 2027 comes around, it will be at R3.80 if it increases by the same percentage as Eskom. Essentially, we think that the system has failed, right? Eskom says that NERSA has starved it of funds over the last decade. Tariffs are below cost of production, including replacement of plant, and this is the fundamental problem. Everybody else says they can't afford this increase. In other words, we can't afford to pay what Eskom needs to run the present system. So we think that the coal power system has failed. It's not just Eskom's system, it's Eskom and users, and it was developed by and for the minerals energy complex. That's Eskom plus the big industrial users who used to be Anglo, Billiton, Sasol, etc. And the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy is also part of that MEC. The model that they preferred was big coal power plants to supply big base load. And that's the model that has been imposed on the rest of the country. That model has collapsed under the rising costs of its own expansion. It's Medupi and Kusile basically that have broken Eskom. The old minerals energy corporations are now on their way out, leaving environmental liabilities behind them. The energy intensive users group who demanded big base plants in the first place have now abandoned that model and want to pass the costs on to the rest of the society, and industry in general are still looking for special pricing agreements. Back at the time of MYPD2, we said that the fundamental issue here is not the funding model. We said we are being asked to pay for the wrong energy model. Wrong on the choice of power generation, wrong on what and who the power is for, wrong on social and environmental externalities, and wrong because Eskom wants people to pay for its choices without really consulting them. And we think it's still wrong on all those grounds. We note that the big issues are not being addressed. They're not only the big issues for NERSA, they're not only the big issues for Eskom, they are the issues for the government, which it seems not to be capable of confronting. Basically, Eskom's debt remains unpayable. Municipal debt to Eskom is unpayable, and that debt, as I think Brian Commercy pointed out, entrenches poverty. The claim Soweto debt is unpayable, and frankly, it looks like a blind estimate of what has been consumed there with extra interest added. The mineral and energy complex's debt to society for 100 years of environmental vandalism is unpaid, and Eskom is now called on to mitigate its ongoing pollution by the decision of the Department of Environment, but says it can't afford to do so. So we think that basically the system is bust. Over the last decade, the big drivers of cost have been new build and coal. Eskom claims it's now containing these costs, and it says the big costs are now IPPs. As people have been remarking, those are pass-through costs. We do agree that the early contracts were way overpriced, but we also think that Eskom is now making a false equivalence in the way that it sets out its costs between primary energy for coal as against electricity delivered to the grid. Again, another point in which we agree with previous presenters is that the model of privatizing IPPs is a bad model. We don't agree with it. We've opposed privatization over the last decade and a half. We are also alarmed by the way in which the cost increases, particularly for the RMIPP, the risk mitigation program, escalate, and a lot of that is based on the costs of gas. Eskom talks about protecting the poor. We think that what is happening is that they are making poverty, together with the minerals energy complex, which developed over the last century to create the most unequal economy in the world. The bottom 60% of people are poor, at least, that's on official stats. Many of those people use electricity plus paraffin, plus wood, plus coal, and the high electricity cost forces an increasing reliance on dirty fuels producing indoor pollution. So there is a double cost on poorer people that gets more intense as people have less income. The next 20% of people, the people who lie between 60% and 80% of the population, according to basically the second quintile, the second richest quintile. The next 20% are actually vulnerable of slipping into poverty, and many in that group are tied to electricity. So if you think about people in South Durban living in council flats, reliant, very many people on pensions, essentially the increases being asked for are simply unaffordable. People are needing to make choices between food and the means of cooking it. They're needing to make choices between electricity and other essentials, including school costs, etc., etc. And people are choosing who will eat. Again, quoting from the Maritzburg Economic Justice and Dignity Organization, women eat last so that their children and families eat better. Women forego all good nutritious food in the home. It means that women's health is very poor. And we note that households are also taking on debt. They're not taking on debt to Eskom, they're taking on debt to the Moshanisa. And I think we know where all that lives, with very high interest rates being charged on that debt. Eskom talks about 3 ways of protecting the poor: subsidized cost of connection, essentially following apartheid. Connecting Black people to the grid was a minimal form of equity, and it should remain so. Clean and safe energy is essential for energy justice now. It relieves women of the burden of finding fuel. It eliminates household air pollution. It reduces household fires, particularly in shack settlements, and the deaths that arise from that. And it eliminates informal connections and the dangers that arise from that. The free basic electricity, we don't think that 50 kilowatt hours is enough. It needs to be at least 200 kilowatt hours. And it's based on a mean and derogatory means testing for, quote, indigents, unquote, and how they are defined is left to municipalities. Research by Perry has indicated that funding from Treasury for 10 million households, in fact, only gets to about 2 million households. That is a 6 billion rip-off by municipalities of the poorest households. On that, there is no oversight. Government claims a developmental priority for eliminating poverty and reducing inequality, but it would seem that they don't actually see the poor. The inclining block tariff. Eskom notes this as a means of protecting the poor, but Eskom wants to remove it. We think that there should be a universal inclining block tariff that works like a progressive tax. And I think the submission from SATSI has already addressed that. We think that the first block should be 200 kilowatt hours free, the second block a modest increase on, say, the next 200 kilowatt hours, with steeply increasing blocks thereafter. Environmental costs of coal. None of Eskom's power stations meet the legally required minimum emission standards, with the exception of Kusile. Eskom assumes in this application, Eskom assumes compliance will be postponed again and perhaps forever, but in fact, it has not been postponed. The Department of Environmental Affairs refused to continue postponing minimum emission standards, and it notes that they were first published in 2010, and Eskom has made a minimal effort to comply with those standards since then. In fact, this goes all the way back to 1996 to 1998, when minimum emission standards were written into policy through the Consultative National Environmental Policy process. They were written into law only with the Air Quality Act of 2004, and Eskom has done nothing but obstruct over 24 years. The costs to that include, on research that we commissioned, 2,200 premature deaths a year. There's a whole bunch of illness that comes behind, before those deaths and around those deaths. And research for Greenpeace indicated that the difference between Eskom's emission reduction plan and full MES compliance is about 16,000 premature deaths over the life of those plants. So those are the costs of of Eskom's non-compliance. Another mechanism that they are using is offsets. In other words, they're saying, well, we won't reduce our emissions, but we'll offset that by doing something else. And what the something else that they think that they want to do is to offset by reducing household emissions. These offsets relate to the first MES period between 2015 and 2020. We objected to that because it was a deal between government and Eskom without actually consulting community. on the industrial and domestic emissions were also in no way comparable. We also objected because a government is outsourcing its responsibilities, and we thought that the likely result was cheap and nasty implementation, and that is indeed what people from KwaZulu-Natal told us was happening in Eskom's first pilot project. And we note that although these offsets were supposed to be being done between 2015 and 2020, or at least between 2015 and 2025, they're scarcely off the ground yet. On climate, Eskom's language has changed. They've established a just energy transition unit, which would have been inconceivable a couple of years back. But at the same time, they hold by a decommissioning schedule, which takes Majuba through to 2050 and Medupi and Kusile through to 2070 or 2080. That is way too late. Modeling for a 2-degree world suggests that Eskom should have no more fossil fuel emissions after about 2035 or 2040. They're talking about fossil gas as a bridging fuel. That doesn't cut it, and would imply that we need a second just transition after the coal transition, a gas transition. There really isn't enough time for this kind of stuff. They acknowledge that the electricity sector is quickest and cheapest to decarbonize, but they say that CO2 from Eskom will decline to 215 million tons in 2030. That's not a reduction. They haven't done 215 million tons except in 1 year over the last 6 years. The implied South African emissions, if that is what Eskom is going to emit in 2030, is 543 million tons in 2030. That's not compatible with 1.5 degrees. It's not compatible with 2 degrees, and it's not compatible with the revised nationally determined contribution, which sets 2030 emissions at between 350 and 420 million tons, and that revised NDC is not, in our opinion, adequate, particularly not at the top of the range.
Mr. Holloway, you have given you 2 more minutes over the 15 minutes. If you can please wrap up.
Okay, certainly. So I'm just going to conclude very quickly. Eskom's debt remains the biggest threat to the country's economy, and government has simply been muddling through that with equity injections, but no real plan. Cost-reflective prices, they're not going to fix it. NERSA has been left to square the circle, but the regulatory system is already broken. NERSA has already lost 4 rounds in court to Eskom. Poverty is the product of 100 years of development. Poor people can't bear the cost of government failure and the cost of cost-reflective prices on top of that, and the climate and local environmental crises must be addressed with absolute urgencies. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your input. Members, if you can engage with the presentation, please. Any questions for Mr. Holloway? Mr. Mkiza?
Thank you, Chairperson, and thanks, Mr. Hallows. I just want to understand here, because you are raising the issue of the 200 kilowatt hour that you are suggesting instead of the 50 kilowatt hour FBE. And then you go then to the inclining block tariff and you talk of the universal block, the first block being 200 kilowatt hours free. Are these mutually exclusive, or they are one and the same thing? And then secondly, I would just like to answer, how will these be funded in your own view? Because sometimes we've talked about these things, and the issue of how they are going to be funded, then it then becomes someone else's problem to think about. And the other thing that I want to understand from you is, do you advocate an abrupt change, especially when it comes to the issue that pertain to the climate, that pertain to coal, that pertain to gas being used as a transitional fuel? Because even I think in the Brussels they talk of having nuclear possibly and gas being recognized as clean in terms of assisting in the transition. Just want to get your view, and in whether talking of abrupt or phased approach, noting the issues that talk to also the need to ensure that we've got stability in the sector. And then you also, I just want your comment with respect to IPP cost contribution being now a major concern. That also in juxtaposing it with your comment on the climate change. And I note that you're talking here of cost reflective prices. I just want to understand if you are diametrically opposed to the cost reflective tariffs or prices as a principle, or you just mentioning it, as what is being used currently. Because I think you're the second speaker now talking about the cost reflective tariff it's somehow, I would say, in a negative sense, as if to say that maybe we should be moving away from it, whereas this is embedded in our electricity pricing policy. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you, Mr. Mkiza. Any further input, colleagues, from your side? Maybe not. Can you maybe just, I had one question for you, Mr. Alois. For me, it relates to the funding and the affordability by the fiscus. I just did a quick and dirty calculation based on the 228 cents per kilowatt hour number that you actually put. I actually hope that I actually got it right, and looked at the 200 kilowatt hours per month of FBE, and for 10 million households, it came out to some number close to 55 billion rands per annum. How would we suggest the fiscus funds that? Where would it get that money? Thanks.
Great, thank you very much. Yes. Our view on the inclining block tariff, I'll take Mr. Nkiza's questions first, is yes, that should be a universal thing, and the cost escalations at the top end of consumption should be quite severe. We do think that not enough emphasis is being paid to demand side, to energy conservation essentially, and we note that there have been comments around stimulating sales, etc. We actually need to be going the other way. I'll come back to the question of how funded. The question of the European Union, and it looks like it's going to approve nuclear, and it looks like it's going to approve gas, basically for internal political reasons. We disagree with both of those things. The problem with gas from a climate point of view, and if you're just looking at counting carbon, is that the emissions along the supply chain tend to be emissions of pure methane, which has a very heavy impact on climate, about 84 times the impact of carbon dioxide per ton, and over a 20-year time horizon. And the time horizon itself is getting increasingly salient in terms of how you think about meeting the 1.5 or the 2-degree targets. Not meeting those targets is going to be extremely severe. One of the previous presenters talked about the inclement weather that has been suffered. At 1.5, that weather is going to be exponentially more severe, and at 2 degrees, it is going to be virtually unlivable. And on the Highveld, a lot of those power stations are simply not going to run, either because they're being flooded, or because it's too hot, or because there isn't enough water. Stability of the grid, yeah, that's a really good idea. But if you're going to balance stability of the grid against climate change, well, I'd say that we need to attend to climate change. Yes, we do think that we should be going very rapidly for a transition. We'd like to see that as a just transition. We don't really see privatization of the system as being a good idea in that context. What we are doing is paying a lot of transnational corporations who are then taking the profits out of that system and back to their home countries. We think that the power system should be socially owned, but not only by Eskom. We think it should be socially owned at the level of municipalities and at the level of communities. Cost-reflective tariffs, frankly, the whole system needs to be rethought from top to bottom, not just how Eskom changes its, how NERSA changes its methodology or whatever. The whole system of how we fund this stuff needs to change from top to bottom, and it needs to take into account what can be afforded and how that is going to be financed indeed. The final question comes to how is this to be paid for? In our view, what broke Eskom was the attempt to reproduce the energy model of the minerals energy complex. At the same time, a lot of the corporations who are integral to that complex are doing stuff like transfer pricing and taking money offshore before they pay their taxes, or under invoicing themselves through the operation of offshore accounts in offshore tax havens, etc., etc., etc. All those fun and games are on, and I think the cost of that to the fiscus, the cost of cheating to the fiscus, basically has been calculated at truly exorbitant figures, around about 100 billion a year or something like that, I think. So we think, yeah, Treasury ought to be, Treasury and the Revenue Service ought to be chasing down those kinds of private corporate malfeasance, and we think that with that money coming back into the system, we think that there should be money to pay. We also note that Eskom claims that underpricing electricity is a subsidy to everybody, and the biggest subsidy, of course, goes to the biggest users. They argued that on previous rounds of the MYPDs as well. And I think the people who should, in fact, end up paying for the system are the people who've had the historical benefits from it and who have externalized massive costs on society. Does that answer your questions?
Yes, it does, Mr. Alois, and thank you for your input. And I do assume that you have submitted a written, that you have made a written submission To NERSA as well? Okay, no, thank you.
Yeah.
All right. So with that, on behalf of NERSA, I'd like to thank you for your input.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, colleagues. Can we then move straight on to the next, the last two presenters? The last two presenters today, we are moving to hear a presentation from Ms. Bulelwa Clarkson. If I can see you, madam. I did see you sign in earlier. Ms. Clarkson?
Yes, I'm here, sir.
Okay, no, thank you. All right. Before we start, can I just ask you if you're objecting to taking an oath or an affirmation?
No, I'm not.
Okay. With that, kindly raise your right hand and affirm the following. Do you solemnly declare that the information or the evidence that you are going to give to this panel is the truth and the whole truth as you know it?
I do.
For the record, please state your name, the organization that you represent, and your designation therein, please.
Good evening, everyone. I am Mulelwa Clarkson, and I am from the Eastern Cape, Gqeberha. I represent an organization called #Let's Live Green. It's an NPO, a community-based one.
Thank you. You have 15 minutes. I'm not sure if you're making a PowerPoint presentation or a verbal presentation.
Making a verbal one, sir.
Oh, all right. No, thank you. You have 15 minutes, madam, if you can then fully utilize it. And your 15 minutes starts now. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
I'm raising on a point of trying to level everyone on the life we live as your ordinary citizens of South Africa, as those who are at the bottom of the barrel. I don't have a formal presentation that is a PowerPoint that has all the technicalities. No, I am just an ordinary young citizen talking on behalf of my community, which is in the location, and it's with people who are the poor or the poorest. So a while back, before I go onto my presentation, a while back, we were with NNR and Eskom applying for a site licensing. I say that these things, they get to be complicated when you have to do them, especially with us people who have nothing and who are considered as nothing by the rest of the continent or the rest of the people in the world. It takes a bit of challenges before you are accepted and you are participating in these kinds of hearings, whereas they say that, and I want to underline the word public hearing or public participation. So therefore it includes us, the people who are on the down low, the people who don't get to be given opportunities like this. I'm objecting on the fact that Eskom wants to apply for a 20.5% price fixing, because it will impact us people who are poor very, very much. As it is very hard for us to even cater to our basic needs as groceries, as taking on a taxi. As you saw, there was a price fixing for fuel. So therefore, when there's price fixing for fuel, then the taxis also do a price fixing of their own. I'm sorry. Now, my plight with Eskom is that please think about us, those who are at the bottom, the ones who do not even afford to buy a loaf of bread a day. What about those people? What about our grandmothers? And when you take these kinds of public hearings and put them on sites like Teams, on those virtual sites like Teams or Zoom, what about a 65-year-old in Umtata or here in my location in Zweden who wants to participate, but then they don't know where to start? They don't know how to log on to the internet, and then they don't even have smartphones, let alone smartphones. Our problem first, it is with data first. Data first. It is even, we do not even afford to buy data. How about Eskom goes back and then reapplies for this, and then come back to the location and try and find out from people who are not who cannot access this kind of hearing, who cannot access the internet, who do not have data to go on virtually. The meeting took more than 2 hours to 3 hours. Where is one going to find data to sit in a hearing and listen virtually? Where is one going to find time to do all that with all these struggles, food, schools and whatnot? We have many things that we are struggling with, and with what the municipalities in our areas are doing, it is very, very hard, because you have to keep up with buying electricity, paying for water, because if you don't pay for water, they terminate your electricity. So how is it possible for us here who don't know, down here who don't know the technicalities and all that stuff that everyone talks about, and all these big words that we don't even know? We have to Google or go to the dictionary in order to know how do we deal with this kind of things. Why don't entities like NESA and the NNR first try and find a solution on how to get to us, those who don't know this kind of things? Because I can bet you, maybe I had the privilege of having data for today. What about next week when you say again, okay, there is another hearing that we want virtually? What about next week? What about the week after that? What about someone else whom doesn't afford data? What about them? So my plight is with all these big entities. When you are making decision or trying to make decision, please think about us at the bottom of the barrel. We're having problems with water. There is no water, and PE is going to have no water at all. We are becoming the province that's going to go to zero, or the location, the town that's going to go to 0% of not getting water. We don't have water. We have to worry about electricity. We have to worry about food and taking our kids to school. How long do we have to suffer like this? And you hear from our parents, they are saying that it's better that we go back to the apartheid government, because the apartheid government did way better than this one. How long do we have to suffer at the bottom? Because those who can afford all these things, they do not have a problem, and they do not see the problem with everything that is happening. But us at the bottom, and
Madam, I'm not sure it's on my side or on your side, noting the concerns you raised around data anyway. Can members, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Chair. I think the problem is on her side. It's just frozen. Maybe she can deactivate the video and proceed, if possible. If maybe Mr. Dlamini may assist in that regard.
Okay, Mr. Dlamini unfortunately has, Mr. Mabunda, if you can assist me, please. And I don't know what alternative approaches we as NESA can have to assist this very point that she's been trying to make across, that, you know, put across, that says she's been online for over 2 hours. So it's been her data for 2 hours. So I don't know what we can do as NESA to assist that. Mr. Mabunda, is it anything that we can assist with?
We can take it offline.
No, I'm just saying, can we assist right now in terms of can we assist Ms. Clausen? If not, I don't know what we can assist her with, so that at least she can still continue to make her point. But perhaps we can move on to the next presenter. I do believe that that this has exactly made the point she's trying to make. I don't know, maybe she's going to try to connect again. But if not, if she can't connect, I think the point has clearly been made, which is a difficult point for NERSA. Because there is COVID, we can't exactly go to communities. But anyway, that being said, it is said that it's ended like that. Can I that maybe for the sake of time, move on to the next presenter, members, if you agree, and hopefully Ms. Claassen can then be accommodated to finish her point. It is said indeed. The next presenter actually is meant to be Mr. Melikaya Plan. So I don't know if he is available. Mr. Melikaya Plani from Humani Nande Environmental Ambassadors. Is he available? Mr. Mabunda, can you assist me, please?
It doesn't appear, so Chair will follow up on the present.
All right. That having been said, I think is that maybe no, it's not. I was hoping that it might be Ms. Bulelwa Claassen trying
Yes,
to. Oh, it's you. Apologies for that. The suggestion is that perhaps you can stop showing the video and just speak. It might save your data, and then so you can conclude your point, madam. Apologies for that.
okay, sir. So I'm getting back to it. I had network issues. I am very sorry for that. Okay. So back again at asking Eskom all these questions. What about our pensioner mothers and grandmothers and grandfathers who do not get anything but a measly 1,860 rands from the Department of Social Development just to go by for the month and have something to eat? They do not work. We solely survive on that money only in a household of maybe 10 people. How do you go on about that? And when you are a pensioner, mind you, you don't get the subsidy for the indigenous subsidy that the municipality gives, which gives you the tariff of 50 kilowatt tariff electricity. You do not get it. You have tenants who are living in the yard, maybe 2 tenants. Those tenants are paying 1,200 for the both of them combined. And they tell you that you have tenants in the yard and they are using extra water, so you can't pay, you can't be getting the indigenous subsidy. So what about those people? What about those people who are living on hand to mouth, but do own households? They are living on hand to mouth and can't afford to pay for electricity, water, and all the other levies. I was looking at the municipality letter that was delivered at home today, and it said, "Thank you for paying for refuse. Thank you for paying for such petty things. Refuse has to be taken. It is our right for our taking." Another point that I want to raise is why can't Eskom, with all this energy of applying to the NNR, to NESA, why can't Eskom just do a simple thing and try and channel all these things on the things we are all the green organization preaching about? Why can't they channel to the direction of renewable energy, where everyone will get to get something in return? Measly me, who's not that educated, who doesn't have diplomas and PhDs, can get work. This kind of things, things that they come up with, they are so complicated then that you don't even know if you will ever fit in those spectrums. You don't know if you will ever fit in the kind of places that they do things in. So I am very confused. Again, I'm very angry, and again, I'm very disappointed in Eskom not trying so hard to come back to people, as it is. They wanna raise where they wanna fix prices, whereas we are getting too much load shedding. I can tell you one thing: there was a time we did not have electricity for 5 days flat. We have phones to charge, we have to eat, but now because Eskom decided to just switch off the electricity, we have to go back to bases forcefully. We have to cook outside. We have to bath with cold water, because sometimes you can't wake up early in the morning and make fire and put on water. So why can't Eskom think about us? They must always in their back of their minds think about us at the bottom. And this is a problem with every government and with every government department and every private sector, is that we are disregarded as people who are poor. We are very disregarded in such a way that if you would listen to stories that are portrayed or are told in the locations, you would literally cry, because it's hard in a way that it's opening schools and you'll find out that there's a child who doesn't have shoes, doesn't have a whole uniform for school, and you go to the house and look, what can I do to make the situation better? And you'd find that there is no making the situation better. So we struggle with these little things. And then there's this thing, enkulu, they call Eskom, that wants to suck us dry while they know that we do not have money. They know that electricity is a basic thing. You have to iron, you have to do all those things that are aligned with electricity, but yet they keep on doing those kind of things and doing them. They are going now to say that, I saw an article saying that Koeberg station is about to be closed. It's about to shut down. So if Koeberg station shuts down, because I say that Koeberg station is the one that they are preaching all the time, which is it's working effectively. So if Koeberg station shuts down, there's no load shedding. What about us? Because we in the locations always feel the wrath of the load shedding. In town, they would have load shedding, but it would be just a few days or 2 hours here and there. They would say to us, it's stage 2 load shedding, but the electricity would be gone all day, and you only get electricity at 9 o'clock. You haven't eaten, you haven't bathed, you haven't done anything that is aligned with electricity. So think about the people at the bottom, let alone those people who can afford everything that they want. There is nothing that they need. Think about us at the bottom. At the bottom, it's very hard that even a 10 rand is a luxury. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Madam. I did say that I think even your losing connectivity made the point itself, the point that we were trying to make, things that a number of us take for granted, and indicated that unfortunately the challenge with COVID, what COVID has done is that it has forced us to work differently. We can't physically as NESA go to communities, and we are looking at ways of trying to optimize in terms of how we reach communities and in the language of the communities as well. But unfortunately, COVID is one that has influenced the direction that we are taking, and also we're living in an economic the economic structure, the actual our economy, the way it's structured, the economy in which we live, is not poverty friendly, unfortunately. But anyway, colleagues, I don't know if you've got any comments, any inputs to the presentation that has been made by Ms. Claassen. I see you, Madame Pongose, if you can go first.
Thank you very much. Just to thank Ms. Claassen for her presentation. It was quite detailed, and it really shared with us, the panel, the plight of the communities, and also her communities in Kadeha, where she comes from, and to say things that other people take for granted, like ability to access these sessions, is something that is a near impossibility for someone. Instead of buying data, they'd rather buy bread. And we've noted that, and that Eskom must also look at alternative sources of energy, that will benefit everyone, because this constant increasing in the price of electricity proves unaffordable for most communities who don't have much. especially because electricity is a basic need. So I wanted to just ask Ms. Klassen, what would you suggest Eskom be funded, for the service provision? Because everything that you do as a business, it has to be funded from somewhere, and you need to make returns in order to recover, the funding or how much you've spent to provide that service. How would you suggest that Eskom be funded? And to say, is there a particular, maybe area in the fiscus, within the fiscus, where you think there could be reprioritization, which will be funding for Eskom for them to reduce their prices and, somehow they still have their running costs intact? I think that is my comment and question. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Madam. Mr. Mkhize, your input, please, sir.
Thank you, Chairperson, and thanks to Madam Klassen for the presentation from my side. I note the issue of even talking to apartheid government as having been better. I think sometimes there are also sentiments that are same, like the Israelites said on their journey when they were out of the slavery of Egypt, that maybe it was better being a slave then, but the fact remains that it becomes better to be a free person. And I think I appreciate her taking a step to resolve the issues or make a contribution towards that. When it comes to getting to you, my comment on, on both these points is that we do, as I alluded earlier on, that we do have Amanda Mthembu and Vuyela Posa who participate in terms of reaching out to the communities. And I think they have heard you, and I think they're doing quite a splendid job, and they should be able to be of assistance there. And I think management is heard and is aware. That's one question to say. As you're saying, you are Let's Live Green NGO. Do you propose that Eskom just abruptly abandon the fossil fuels and move into green energy? That you see that as a solution or to these problems or not? I just want to get just to understand where you come from in terms of living green, considering all the issues that pertain to our energy sector being reliant on fossil fuel. Thank you.
Thank you. Madam, over to you.
Okay, so I'm going to start with Mr. Mkhize's question. We are in a newborn NPO. It's an NPO. It's not about them abruptly moving to the green side. No. I'm going to go back to what Mr. David said about a just transition. It's a just transition into the green side. They move slowly but surely, not leaving everything behind as if, because remember, if they say, okay, we are quitting this coal thing, we are quitting it, we are not doing it anymore, then what about those who work in those coal mining industries? What about their jobs? They are going to lose jobs in the name of us saying that we want Eskom to move from this side to the other side. So it's not about them leaving the coal mining industry completely or the fossil fuel industry completely. It's about them just transitioning to the renewable energy side. Another point is, I think this was asked by Ms. Mbongose, that what do I suggest Eskom gets funding from? I think Eskom is getting funding already from the government for renewable energy, because I saw an article saying that Eskom is moving to renewable energy, is swiftly moving to renewable energy. So therefore, the government can fund Eskom for that, and it means that when the government funds Eskom, then it means that Eskom gives us electricity without any interruptions of load shedding, and it means that people can afford to buy electricity without them increasing the prices every now and then, and without having hassles on whether the kilowatts are low or whatnot. And let me remind you that when we say renewable energy, we mean those big windmills that we see in the farms or in the rural areas. On a windy day like this, because it's windy today in PU, on a windy day like this, the electricity is just running through, and it's running swiftly. So I think that they must go back to those companies or to those entities that suggests to them, or that always brings proposals to them about renewable energy, and sit down and plan proper in order for us to be also in their minds that there are people who wanted this and this and that. There are people in a place called Port Elizabeth that want this and this and that, and we can cater for them too. Even if they don't want to cater for the big cities, maybe there is no space for renewable energy in the big cities, then they can come and do it for us here in the small locations. And I know for a fact that even in the big cities there are struggles with electricity. They do really need the renewable electricity to do this, for easing the struggles that they have with electricity. So yeah, I think that's just about that. But yeah.
Thank you very much, Madam, for your input. We really appreciate your passionate delivery of the issues that are faced by the poor and the downtrodden. The point that I think we all need to consider, though, is clearly the issue that we live in a community, we live in an economic structure which demands certain things to be done in a particular way, and we need to, whatever solutions that we propose, they need to be fully based on the economic structure that we have until we change the economy itself or the economic structure. But we really, really appreciate your issues, and I'd like to again extend our our apology in terms of us only being able to engage with the communities in this platform, because we can't physically get to where the communities are and also get to talk in the languages of those communities. We truly apologize for that. Thank you, though, for your input. We've come to the end of the presentations today, because I don't think if I'm correct, Mr. Mabunda, we have not been able to locate Mr. Melikaya Blani.
All efforts have failed, Chair.
All right, no, thank you. With that, we had promised Eskom that at the end of each of the day, they are the applicants, and they have been listening to the inputs from the stakeholders. I don't know if today there is anybody. Are they going to take the 15 minutes offer today, or are they going to incorporate any of the responses in their inputs tomorrow as we move to another province tomorrow? There is the CFO, Mr. Kelly Kasim. Thank you. Welcome back, sir. I don't know. Thank you. You've got your 15 minutes, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I won't take 15 minutes, but I think it's important, I think, firstly, to recognize the input that Ms. Clausen has given. We sympathize. And as you said, Chairperson, the regulator, and obviously through our processes, we need to find a way to address her requirement going forward in the interest of the public hearings. I think, Chairperson, also affordability has come up, and in some of the presentations, some of the mechanisms that currently exist within the policy domain around free basic electricity making sure communities can get access to that free basic electricity. As Ms. Claassen has indicated, in their community, they're not even getting that access. I think that is something yourselves as NASA and obviously municipalities and where Eskom can also assist, we need to really look into that and make sure that all those vulnerable communities do at least access that free basic electricity. I think, Chair, there was obviously comments around increasing it from Mr. House, but you raised the question that it still needs to be funded. And also raised was the issue of other mechanisms that are currently available within the purview of the regulator in terms of tariff structures, declining block tariffs, etc. And then there's also embedded cross subsidies within the current tariffs, but understanding that when you apply a cross subsidy to give relief to one sector of customers, other customers are then picking up that. Chair, I think, and then obviously we will expand with the affordability in subsequent public hearings. I think the other key theme that I did pick up on was you asked the question or to one of the presenters who made a suggestion that let's get rid of cost reflective tariffs. And I think most importantly, one, it's within the Electricity Regulation Act. And at the end of the day, like we've also been passionately justifying our application and the revenue, there are costs that, and based on the regulator and to defend the regulator, we understand it as efficient costs being allowed to be passed on to the consumer. I think one of the stakeholders mentioned that it's a blank check. We don't see it as a blank check, and the regulator then fulfills its duty. At the end of the day, if those costs are not recovered through whatever mechanism, then as I've mentioned, we as Eskom would look to our shareholder and then ultimately the taxpayer to then help fund whatever that gap is. I think, Chair, we've asked to take the oath that what they're presenting is the truth. And I just want to make the point that there was a stakeholder that said that Eskom is potentially deliberately understating our sales forecast. As I've indicated, we've undertaken a clear process and we've believed that the changes are insignificant. I guess every stakeholder has an opinion on what their numbers are. We believe as Eskom and the board, we've applied our mind, and I've taken that out and I definitely make sure that I present the facts and the truth. Those are my values and I will always uphold that. I think last but not least, I think it goes without saying there are many factors that Eskom is balancing in the interest of not only the organization, but the country. And like we are migrating and have indicated, we will transition in a just manner to a more decarbonized Eskom in the interest of the country. It takes time, it comes at a cost. And like Ms. Carson said, we also have to think about the current coal industry as well. Last but not least, I did pick up on a comment that performance measures, etc. We do have a shareholder that is set for the Eskom board and then the management. And I just want to, on record under oath, to say none of the executives have received a salary increase for the last 4 years. We don't receive any short-term bonuses. So we do believe as executives, we also trying to contribute and also taking some of the difficulties personally. But we also take the comments from the community and all the inputs, clearly acknowledging the importance of delivering more efficiencies and also improving in terms of that key energy availability factor that I touched on earlier. Chairperson, I'd like to thank you, the panel, and all the stakeholders that presented today. We do take it seriously and we take it into account. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, CFO. We do engage a lot, and I'm hoping that we will continue to have effective engagement. We are going to have another session tomorrow. But I just thought that in closing, I do want to make these comments, that it is unfortunate that there are a number of policy and legal and regulatory questions that need to be addressed that fall outside of the purview of both Eskom and NERSA, that unfortunately affect the world as we live in at the moment. For instance, the issue that was raised earlier about the use of electricity as a debt collecting mechanism, that even if you were to introduce free basic electricity, but if that mechanism is still being considered as the most appropriate mechanism for debt collection for municipal services, the question is, to what extent, how would we then deal with that issue of provision of free basic electricity? The second issue is one that was raised about even people that have got backyard dwellers, that although you may have a household, but a number of these households, especially in the poor black areas, is that it's not just one family that resides there, but you would have other families that reside in the back. And the question is, how do you provide even that free basic electricity to those communities? Those are policy questions, very difficult to deal with, that unfortunately we can only, as NERSA, work within the regulatory framework that is prescribed for us, including the methodologies that have been approved. So it is a big challenge. The one thing that I do want to raise, however, I think as we move on in the next 3 days, is that it's going to be important that we acknowledge that we come from a past in which mistakes were made across the board. And it is about us acknowledging those mistakes. And it is about then saying, what is it that we need to do that we don't perpetuate the impact of those mistakes? And some of the questions that I may be posing, particularly personally posing to Eskom, especially in respect of how we deal with the past costs, including court judgments and that, is in recognition of that, that as far as consumers are concerned, what they would want to see is that whatever number that we will settle on, first it would be a number that is affordable to them, but it would be a number that would be able to sustain Eskom. But it should be a number that is a final number that most people will then say, well, it is a reasonable compromise, that we need to take into account those past mistakes that have been made and come up with a settlement that works for everybody. And that is going to be a challenge for everybody. I know we are all in these negotiations, negotiating from our own points of view. But at the end of the day, we're going to have to settle something that works for the whole community of South Africa. With those words, I'd like to bring this public hearing today to a close, and we will engage again tomorrow. I'd like to thank you all, those that participated, and wish you a very good night. I thank you.